Hi guys, so today we're going to be covering a couple of topics. We'll talk about working with images, working with forms. We'll also look at how to write clean CSS, how to come up with a good folder structure for your project. Then we'll finally work on a very simple blog styled project. Let's get started. So I already have my project opened up and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this folder assets, and basically, oh sorry, that was a file, so I have to delete this. Let's create a new folder and call this assets. Let's take this off by right clicking and deleting, move to trash. Yeah, so I'm going to rename this, and we have to add the extra s. So this is not compulsory, like you must not use the name assets, right? You can call this uploads, you can call this public, it doesn't matter. I choose to call it assets because it's kind of a better way to reference my collection of files. So within the assets folder, I'm going to have a new folder called JS, and I would also create another folder called CSS. Within the CSS folder, I'm going to have one simple CSS file. I'm going to call this main.css. At the root level here, I'm going to create index.html. Of course, you know what HTML is. So basically, we're going to be writing our structure, our blocks here, and we're going to be styling it with this file. Finally, we'll talk about JavaScript in the future, but I'm going to give a brief introduction to the idea behind working with JavaScript. HTML gives you the structure of your website. CSS gives you the style, and JavaScript would set up behaviors and actions for your website. We'll talk about that in a later video. For now, let's just go ahead and put in the basic HTML block as usual. We'll have the head. We'll also have the title. Within the title, we're going to put our blog, our simple blog. Let's work with our simple blog. Within the head, we'll have the body. Okay, so I think what we're going to do right now is within the head we have to put the link, and then we're going to reference our CSS file. Let's also make it known that this is a style sheet. In order to reference this file, we can't just put main.css because we can't actually see that file from here. So what we have to do is to put in the paths. So basically we'll use this // to reference the assets folder, and then the CSS folder, and finally the main.css file. Let's take a look, and let's verify if this is working. So inside the main.css file, I think I would have to split this. Let's go ahead and split this to the right. Okay, so we can have our HTML file on one part, and we have our CSS file on the other part. Within the CSS file, I'm going to put the body, and let's just put a background of background color of yellow, just to verify if this works. So let's preview this in our browser. The name of our project is blog, and I'm going to open this on Firefox. Alright, so now that we can see Firefox is loaded successfully, and of course our file works perfectly. So let's go back to our code. What we are going to do is to basically talk about the folder structure we have here. So I'm going to zoom in so you can see this better. So you see from the structure we have, we're able to differentiate our files into different folders. This is one of the best ways to arrange your project, but I'm going to also include an image folder. So let's do that. So I'm going to add image. Let's assume you're also working with icons. What I usually do is to also have the icons within the assets folder, at the root level of the assets folder. So now you see we have images. Let's call this images because we have multiple images in here. So we have images, we have icons, and let's go ahead and test with a couple of images. I'm going to navigate to my image folder, and let's go to wallpaper. I'm going to pick a random image from here, so let's work with this. Let's move this image. So I'm simply dragging and dropping it in here, right? Of course, one thing you could do is reveal this in Finder if you're using a MacBook. If you're using a Windows machine, you should probably open it in your File Explorer, and you can simply copy and paste. So let's try with another image. I'm simply going to select another image from here, and I'm going to paste it in here. Let's go ahead and rename the file. So I'm going to call this image1. This is .jpeg, and I'll also call this image2. Alright, .jpeg. Before working with files like this, it's ideal that you ensure that the file is properly optimized for web. We're not doing that right now, but instead we're going to work with the specific size. So if I preview the properties of this file, you see we have a single image reaching about 7.2 megabytes. This is not optimized for web in any way, but one thing you could do, I will show you a sample tool. I have an image optimizer tool. We also have a tool on Windows called Image Optim, and I would put a reference to that in the link, so you can follow the link, and you can also drop your questions on the server where we can recommend a couple of other tools for compression. So let's proceed. Back to our code editor, you see that our images currently carry image 1 and image 2. Let's link one of these images to the body. So I'm going to set background image using CSS. And while working with background image, you have to put in the URL. So let's reduce this a little bit. So we have the URL, and we need to currently the CSS file is within the CSS folder. So we need to come out of the CSS folder, with one step, and we need to also so let's do this. So we need to navigate to the image folder and select image1.jpg. Let us save this and preview in our browser once again. So now you see we have that image, filled up, our screen, but we need to also optimize this image. There are so many properties you can use when working with CSS background. So basically, you can optimize the position. You can also optimize the size. So let's start with the background size. We can set this to cover, and if we refresh our page, you see this covers and fits, the browser page. The next thing we can also do is to set background repeats. To no repeats. Let's put in a very simple text. I'm going to work with H1, and we're going to call this mission tool. We're going to have another H1, and let's call this mass. Alright, so one thing we're going to do here is probably have a style here. We'll call this mission, and here we'll call another style planet. So let's add those styles to our main.css file. So we're going to have mission, which is a class, and we have to use the dots, and we have to also call planets. So within the planet text, we're going to style this. Let's say we have the font size to be 150 px, and I think this works. So let's say for the mission we have the font size to be 25 px. Let's save this and refresh. So now you see it's not very visible because we've not set the color. Let's come back here and set the color. So I'm going to do color of white, and I would paste the same style here. So let's refresh and let's see what we have. So now we have mission to mass. Alright, so I would love to center this item. Basically, you can use text align since we're working with the text, but on the contrary, I would first love to put this in a container, which is div. And now that we have that div container, let's configure our formatter. I'm trying to use the HTML language feature. Alright, beautiful. So now that we have the text items in a div, the next thing I would do in here is to style the div. So let's call this class of container, and I'm going to bring in that container here as well. We're working with a class. I'm going to say display grid place items center. So we're just trying to center the items in here, of course. So there's a bit of a problem. We have not saved this file. Let's go ahead and refresh this again. Now we have mission to mass. Let's also set the height of this container to 100 VH. Let's go ahead and talk about a couple of measurement units. So when you see VH is basically describing the view height, basically the entire view height. So if I refresh, you see that we're able to cover the entire view height, right? So you can actually use the pixels, which is more like the gold standard. So you can use pixels. You can also use percentage if you understand measurement in percentage. We also have REM, so there are different patterns, when trying to set. As you can see, we have a lot of options here. So you have inches, you have millimeter, you have PC, you have PT. We'll talk about this during one of the workshops. where we'll explain the differences and which is preferred depending on the use case. So for now, I'm using the V8 because I want it to fill the entire height and I want those items to be in the center. So now that I have V8, let's go ahead and put another div, and I'll explain why I'm doing this again. So basically, if I refresh this without the div, you see we have a lot of space between both items, right? So using this div item, this we can actually have the items, come closer to each other. So next, we're going to style that second div item, and basically we can use a flex, right? We'll talk about grid and flex, but let's also stick to what we use here, which is the grid, and we'll say place items center. So we just want to make sure that the items within the div are placed in the center. Next, I think we should also bring in the this selector, which is the universal selector, and let's make sure we take off all the margins. Let's use 0, or the paddings as well, 0. So the reason we're doing that is to avoid the spaces around every single element. Next, what to do is to probably change the size. I would love the planet to have a bigger font. So let's go ahead and try 250. Let's see what we have. This is looking bigger, and I think it's lovely. One thing we might want to do is to also set stuff like fonts, right? Basically, setting a font type, you have to work with what we call font family. By default, I'm going to use a font family that I have on my laptop, but I would also show you how to bring in a font family, download a font and probably link it to your file. And it's not that difficult, but let's try, let's work with the Korean new font family. So now you can see we have this type of, font in here. We set that type for just, the mission class. Let's try something better. Let's work with a vertical. I'm sure I have a vertical on my laptop. I don't think so. Oh yeah, I need to terminate this, but yeah, so I have a vertical. So we have mission 2, and I would also love to send the font weight. The font weight is going to determine if this is going to be bold or not. I want to use 100 to make it even small. Let's also touch the size and make it even smaller. So let's work with 17. What I'm trying to do here is just set contrast, right? Mission to looks smaller and mass looks bigger, because that is the main context we're trying to drive at here. We need to also set the font size for mass, the font family for mass. I don't think I have any font I would love to use, but let's go ahead and check. I want to check my my typeface app. I have a bunch of fonts in here, installed on this laptop. So I would love to verify. Yeah, if you also need this tool, I believe this is Mac only, but we have an alternative called FontBase. So I'm going to be sharing that on the link as well. I think it's free, so you can download FontBase, and you can manage your fonts using FontBase. So now in FontBase, I'm going to look for a font that I find. Let's see if I can get something futuristic. All right, let's just work with this, so we don't waste too much time. I'm going to work with Poppins. Poppins is a default. I think it's probably going to be a part of your laptop, or you can also download Poppins. So we have Poppins, we have Inter. For now, I would love to work with the font family of Poppins. So let's see if that works on the page. Okay, probably I spelled that wrongly. So let's see. Let's try Inter. Inter is not working still. So we have, let's verify, what fonts do I have here? Yeah, I was actually hoping I had one of those fonts in here. So I'm going to do a quick search. I'm going to search for Inter. Okay, Poppins. Wow, so obviously I need to download some of these fonts. So let me just quickly show you how you can get a font, into your style. So basically, we have to navigate to our browser, and let's go to Google Fonts. There's so many ways to link up your fonts. You can choose to download the font file, but for now we're just trying to work straight from the Google Font CDN. CDN stands for Content Delivery Network, and Google has a content delivery network for a bunch of fonts, and you can use any of these fonts in your projects because they are basically free. If you choose to work with a paid font, we have a bunch of websites where you can get some of these fonts. We have websites such as Monospace. I think they really have a bunch of cool fonts, so you can check that out later. So now we are currently opening Google Fonts, and what we are going to do is click on Fonts. So we're going to be given a bunch of fonts to select from. I'm going to quickly search for Poppins. So here we go, this is Poppins. So let's select Poppins, and the next thing we're going to do is to copy a couple of links. First, you can decide to set how many font weights you want from here, so you can actually add this. Let's click on this. So you have to click on the plus sign. This will be added to your collection. So we want the Poppins font with a font weight of 100. I think I would love to select basically everything. Yeah, so you can actually copy the link and do that manually, but I think I would prefer to do it this way. And I basically need the font size, the font weight of 900, right? So, but I'm just selecting the whole thing from here. All right, I think we're good. Okay, let's also add the bold italics. Next, what we're going to do is you can copy this. You can use the link tag, to add this into your HTML file. We want to add this straight into the CSS file, so we use the import tag, right? So the link tag will bring this into the HTML file, while the import will bring this into your CSS file. So we're going to pick from here down to the import statement. Let's go back to our code. And I'm going to add this to the top of the file. So now I have imports, right? So I just added this to the file. Let's open this so you can see it even better. So now I have the font added to the file, and the name of the font is Poppins. So you can see family Poppins. So let's pick that Poppins, and let's add Poppins right here. Yeah, so sometimes we'll have what we call fallback fonts. So even if you check the Google font repository, you see we have Poppins with a fallback font of sans serif. I think it's actually good to use it this way. Probably the network is not loading this fast. Sans serif might actually be part of the user's computer or the user's machine. So that can be a good way to have a fallback font. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser now on our page, and let's see what we have. So so we just refresh this, and as you can see, we have Mission to Mars. I think I like this font. It's quite easy, and it's good looking. So this is basically what we have, and so something we might want to also do is to have different different files that describes different CSS function. Probably we have a CSS file for the fonts, right? We can also have a CSS file for variables. You can have a CSS file for your forms, for your buttons, and basically what you might want to do is to have multiple CSS files right within the CSS folder. So let's assume we have the fonts, right? So we have font.css. You can also add, let's say, buttons.css. So I'm going to add the button.css. And within the button.css, we can write our styles for the button in here, but we also need to import it inside the main.css. Now, how do we import a file? We've been able to import, from a URL, but importing a file is quite similar. So we import from the URL, and we just navigate to the name of the file. So as you can see, we're bringing in the button.css and also the font.css. Now that we have the CSS files, you would notice that the moment we add any style into the button or the font, so long we've imported it into the main.css, it's automatically going to be reflected when we had a style in here. So let's work with an example. Basically, I'm going to add a button. So when we have Mission to Mars, let's assume we're going to put in a button here that would say join us, right? Something very simple. So let's add the join us button. So I'm going to have right in here, I'm going to have the button, and we'll have a class. I'm going to call this button primary, and we're going to have the value of join us. So by default, let's see what we have without any style. So we have a very simple casual looking button, join us. Let's go ahead and style this button, and we're going to style this button inside the button.css since we already imported it inside the main.css. So let's go ahead and do this. Click on the button file, and now I'm going to add the button style. I probably would add the primary style since we added a class, and I'm going to call this, let's put in the height. I'm going to set a height of 38 pixels. I'm going to set a width. So you can actually set a width of your preferred length. I'm going to use what we call the mean width, meaning it should not be less than this width. And for the mean width, I'm going to be working with 150 pixels. I'm also going to remove the border, so we have a default none, color of white. Let's save this. So we have the joiners. I mean, this is not looking impressive enough. So what I would love to do is, adjust the height of this button. So let's use 58. Let's change this to 200, and I'm going to use a color of red. Probably not pure red, but something close to what we already have. Or probably we can work with black, something dark, and then we have the color to be white, which is the color of the text, right? And now we have the background color and the color. Let's go ahead and also set the size and weight of the font. So I'm going to say font size, and I would love to use 50 pixels, and then I would say font weight, and probably we can try out we can try out 400, right? Maybe that is too small. Let's just work with 600. I want this to be bold, but not to the extreme. Okay, so this is looking probably too big. Let's reduce the size to maybe 30 pixels. And I think this is not looking so bad. Well, this is looking simple, and the point is we're trying to make sure we come up with something good, with a limited amount of style. So as you can see, we have the style for our button in a different file being reflected in this file, basically because we've imported the entire content into the main.css file. So now we're able to even have more style sheets without importing a lot of style sheets in here. Basically, when you're building your front-end applications, structure would matter a lot. It depends on how you want to structure your project or how the organization prefers to have their project structured. You would also be working with a framework, not casual HTML files. And you might also end up working with what we call components, which we'll be covering very soon when we get to work with Vue.js. For now, this is something simple and basic with less HTML file, a little bit of CSS, and as you can see, this is the output. Maybe we can also, try to add something extra to our button, probably for the border. So we can say we have a border of 1px solid white. I think I would also want us to have something even more, let's say 2px, make this spelling correct, white. So let's refresh, and this is what we have. So we're able to create a new project, come up with a good, clean CSS structure, and next we're going to actually talk about Tailwind before we proceed to working on a styled blog website. Thank you. Curriculum, we're going to be looking at designing a very simple blog. I have a sample here, and this sample is a template from Mika. This is a community template, and we're going to be working with this. We're just going to pick a very simple section from this blog, probably starting from the a few words about. We just have to be fast with this. If you think I am too fast during the recording, maybe what you can do is to probably slow this down, right? So yeah, let's get started. So I have my blog page. What I'm going to do is add this into a backup folder. So I'm going to have like project 1. And I'm going to move this whole item into project 1. Let's close this. All right, so I'm also going to quit Firefox browser. So we have our Figma file open, and yeah, let's close a couple of tabs. What you would do when working with a Figma file is basically, you have to export most of the images. So I'm going to export this image. Of course, you don't use Figma, but you'll be taught how to do exports. It's quite simple. When you have access to the file, all you have to do is click on the image, click on exports, right? And you select the type of image you want to export, either as PNG, JPG, SVG, or even as a PDF. You can export this as a PDF file. You can also select the export quality. We'll leave the default, which is 1x. Let us export this, and now you see we have it downloaded on our laptop. So we're going to move these images into the right folder, right? So let's call this, let's take up the space. So I just took up the space. We're currently working in the blog directory where we have to create project 2. And within the project 2, I'm going to create assets. So I am creating this here, but you can also, go ahead and create this within the project, within Visual Studio Code. So I have images, I have CSS, I have, we're not working with JS for now, but just have that there. So let's move this image file that we have on our downloads into the image location. So let's export the other images as well. We have to be fast with this. So I'm going to call this img, or let's call this blog 1. I'm renaming these items so we can have good naming conventions. Blog 2, let's call this blog 3. Let's call this blog 4. Let's call this blog 5. Let's call this blog 6. Blog 8. So this is quite much. I think we'll just stop here for now. I'm going to select these items, every single one of them, and we're going to export everything at a time. So let's export 8 layers. This will be downloaded as a zip file, so we just have to extract the zip file, and we can move all the blog image items in here. Let's call this header blog, because that would be at the top, so I can go ahead and delete this zip item. And let's move to our Visual Studio Code. So now you see we have the project 2 folder. Let's collapse the project 1. Within the project 2, we have all the images. Let's create our main.css file right here. And then at the roots of project 2, let's also add the index of HTML file. All right, so now that we have our basic structure, let's also put in HTML. And yeah, so sometimes you might want to use the templates. Visual Studio Code provides this boilerplate when you put in the exclamation sign, and clicking on enter gives you a complete template you can work with. So let's call this blog project, and we're going to add the link href and rel style sheets. So back to the href, to the assets, CSS, let's take this off, main.css. So now we have our main.css. Let's work with some universal, let's just style our universal selector. So I'm going to take off the default padding, the margin. We're also going to probably put a default font family here. We don't have a default here for now, so let's take a quick look if we can download this font. So this is called New York Extra Large. We don't know if this has a free option, so let's quickly check out Google Fonts if it does. Google Fonts. So well, I personally doubt if this has a free option, but yeah, while we're waiting on that, I think we can also proceed to putting in the image. So we're going to work with a section here. So I basically want to style our section to give us the specific width. So what we would love to do is to click on inspect, right? So using this inspect bar in Figma, of course, you're not a designer, but basically you have to work with the inspect a lot if your company works with Figma. So you can see we have a width of 854, and that's the width of the image. But what we want to see is the width of the image from the beginning of our page, which is basically 293 pixels. Let's go ahead and work with that. So if we have a section right here, we're going to say we have a width of 293 pixel, and then we're going to say we have a margin auto. Yeah, so I basically love to measure this in percentage. So your designer will probably tell you what to use. For now, let's just work with a sample of 75%. That should be fine. We're not taking our time to come up with this measurement scale, but imagine 0 auto would automatically position everything within the section in the center of the page. And I will show you an example. If we have a background color here that gives us maybe yellow, I really love that color. So let's say we have a section in here, and then we have our div. For example, we have h1, hello world. Let's see what we have when we preview this in our browser. I'm going to open this in Finder, and I'm going to open this up in Chrome. So you see we have that spacing that I was telling you about, so at least we're sure that that space is in there. The next thing we might want to do first is to add the image tag, and let's work with src alt. I'm going to call this the header image. Let's close that. For the src, I'm going to navigate to assets, images, and the header image. So let's save. Let's preview. So this is what we have. Let's go back to our style and take off the background color because that is not needed. Let's refresh again. So we have this size, this style in here. One more thing is within the div, we have a default div and we've not set the font family. Let's comment on that for now. So within the div, we can actually put everything within the div in center, or we can also do that within the section. So it depends on how you choose to do this. I think I'll prefer to do that within the div, and I can call this a container. Remember to put in your class or your ID property in there. So we have container. Let's also do that here, container with display of grid, and I'll just place items to center. So let's refresh and see. This should probably move to the center properly. Next thing I will do is looking at our design. We're going to bring in our heading, which is probably we can use H1. You see we have the style already rendered here, so we can easily pick this style. Of course, we're not working with every single item, and I'll show you that some of the items you might need or you will need to work with here are probably the font family, the font size, the font weight, and sometimes you would need the font, the line height, but also I think the text align would work and the color as well. So let's pick this from here back to our code. We're going to navigate to the index.html. We're going to put in our H1 right here, and then we put in the text. So before we put in the text, let's call this the class of heading, or let's say blog heading. And within our main file, we might want to have blog and then blog heading. So it's good to actually have this prefix. This prefix is actually good for understanding which of the styles work for this specific section. Basically, you might also want to use the underscore style. We have a bunch of styles you can use. You can do this as well. I prefer to have it this way or this way. So I'm going to drop this style in here. Remember, the font family is not going to work because we don't have this font installed in our laptop, and we did not import this font into our CSS file. But basically, we're going to have that size. Let's go ahead and put in the text in here. So I'm going to copy this item, the text, which is basically right here. So let's copy what we have here and put it in here. Let's save, go back to our browser and refresh. So you see this is what we have. Of course, we have the height, so you really need to work with the height. But basically, looking at our design, you notice one thing, that we have some spacing, like 44, which is the spacing from this text down to the top, right? We also have the spacing from this text down to the next text. Basically, we can achieve this by working with margin. So we have to put the margin top as 44 pixels, the margin bottom as 32 pixels. Let's go ahead and try that. So back to the main.css file, we can have the margin top as 44 pixels and the margin bottom as 33 pixels, if I'm not mistaken. Let's verify. I think it's 32. Alright, so one more thing you can do is to actually use the margin and then set for top and bottom. You have a shorthand where you can just put in the margin and then you set, for the basic properties, such as a setting for the top, the left, the right, and the bottom. Let's leave it like this for now. Let's save this. Back to our web page. Let us refresh. So now you see we have that space. So for the rest of the section here, I'll leave that to you because I want you to practice with this as an assignment. Something really simple, working with this section and this section. I'll show you a quick example so you work with the rest. And this code will be uploaded on GitHub, so you can download and finish up with this section, probably down to this section. You don't need to work on this. If you can, that would be great, but that is not a priority here. Neither do you need to work on the navigation. We'll show you how to work on stuff like that. For the ruler, of course, you can use your HR tag, and I believe you know what to do when you get to working with the regular text, right? So let's work with an example on what we will do while trying to implement a simple grid. We're going to work with CSS grid, but of course, you can also use a flex for that. Let's call this a blog grid container. I think that's not a bad naming convention. So we're going to have a display grid. And within our file, you see we have two items, so which means we can basically say grid template columns, and we can work with what we call fractional sections. You can also work in percentages by using 50%, 50%. This is to say you're going to have two sections on your grid, and if you have an extra item, you're going to then have three sections on your grid. Now, basically, I'm going to show you what this would look like when we apply this, so that you'd understand what we're trying to talk about here. So let's come back here. We're going to create a new container right here with a class of grid. We're going to call it class of grid. Let's take a look at the name again. Blog grid container. Blog grid container, and let's close this. So within the blog grid container, we're going to have two texts, just to show you what, or probably two images. So I'm going to have the first image, src, and then we have assets image. Let's work with blog 1, and we have that should be alt blog 1. Now we have two images. Let's save this and preview what we have on the browser. So let's refresh. Alright, so I think we made a mistake there. So when we refresh, you see we have two images, using the same. So let's change this to blog 2. Let's save this, and also back to the main.css. Let's add a bit of spacing using gap, and with gap we can just say 20px, to create a gap in between these items. Let us refresh, and now you see we have two items in here. Well, you can also put this in a div, so you can have your image or your text, right inside each item. So the way it works is, now that we have been able to create this, basically this is the parent, right, which is the grid container, and these are the children. Looking at your style, you have specified that you want to be able to contain 3 children. But the problem with this is, when working with percentage, your children should not exceed 100% when combined together. So this is practically wrong. Instead, you can actually work with the fractional, or you can also give this like 33.3%, in 3 places. But let's work with the fractions, which is 1f arrow, 1f arrow, 1f arrow. If we should save this and we refresh, you see that automatically we've given a up space for a third item, right? And that means we can have more images, in here. So let's bring in block 3, so you see what that would look like. So we have block 3, and then we refresh. You see that we now have the third item. Now, what if we decide to work with the fourth item? Obviously, this would not stay on the same line, because we've exceeded, the expectation of the grid. So if I refresh this, you see that went to a new line. What we can do instead is leave this as 1f arrow, 1f arrow, or we can also try to use what we call the repeaters, but we'll talk about that in the later section. So let's leave it as 1f arrow, 1f arrow, and we are basically going to work with just 2 items. The difference we are going to do here is we're going to have div, and within the div we have the images, right? And every image will then have a text right beneath that. So let's work with page 5, and we're going to pick sample text from our design. Let's go to our Figma file, and let us select. So here are some things you should know regarding how we work. Okay, so we're going to have that text right here. Here are some things you should know regarding how we work. Alright, so we can also duplicate what we have here by just copying and pasting that, then also replacing this. Alright, so let us, okay, so basically you see that is quite small. We have decided to drop this for you as a task, though we're going to pick a certain area where you have to work on something quite simple, maybe implementing a couple of other frames, or maybe a couple of sections. So that will be in the task assigned to you. Ensure you go through the task, and we'll continue implementing this during the workshop.